Hello everyone, this is Brother Bruno Thomas from the community of St. John. I would like to give you 12 talks on prayer. We will look at the prayer in the aspect of a catechetical dimension, meaning a religious instruction. And for this we look to Jesus Christ, our Master. We hear from the disciples asking Jesus, teach us how to pray. And Jesus teaches us how to pray, and we understand prayer through the Holy Scriptures, which we will look at greatly in detail. But also we will look at his saints, the saints of the Catholic Church, and what they speak of on prayer. And also various books, namely the Catechism of the Catholic Church, a book called A Guide of the Man of Good Will in the Exercise of Mental Prayer, and our famous book called Fire Within, of which most Americans know from Father Thomas, and a most recent book that just was published last year called A Personal Prayer, A Guide for Receiving the Father's Love by Father Acklin and Father Hicks, both Benedictine monks from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. We know that the word prayer comes from an important word meaning to entreat or to ask. And we see this also in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which will go further and say we are a beggar before God. However, there is one important thing that we need to know before we enter into this question of prayer. What is the role of faith in my life of prayer? Jesus tells us this clearly. Whatever you ask for in prayer, you will receive, if you have faith. And again, he says, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and you will. This fundamental principle or role in our life of prayer is so important because it helps us to avoid thinking that we need a method or that we need to have a certain plan. No, faith gives us the beginning, the foundation, and root of what prayer is. The letter to the Hebrews even goes further and says, without faith we cannot approach God, nor we can even enter into a relation with God. We can't even speak to him, listen to his voice, or converse with him. We have all received the virtue of faith at our baptism. For the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, at our baptism we respond to God who reveals himself and gives himself to man. And so the role of prayer helps us to ascend to the divine, to go up the mountain. It helps us to have a secure guide, like a compass, to be able to be in the right direction in our relation with God. And lastly, it frees our mind from human ways of thinking and thinking of the things of God. Now that we have looked at the fundamental principle of prayer, or role of prayer, we need to look at the 4 ends of prayer. And that's what we will look at in 12 consecutive talks. But before we do that, I would like to give 4 definitions from Catechisms of the Catholic Church that tells us about these 4 pillars. Let us listen attentively to what the Catechisms of the Catholic Church say. The first catechism comes from the Council of Trent. It says, prayer honors God. The first fruit which we receive is that by praying we honor God, since prayer is a certain act of religion, which is compared to Scripture to a sweet perfume. The Catechism of St. Pius X. Prayer is an act by which we elevate our souls to God, to render him our homage, expose to him our necessities, and ask him for graces. The Baltimore Catechism says prayer is the lifting of our minds and hearts to God, to adore him, to thank him, to ask forgiveness, and to beg him all the graces we need, whether for soul or body. And now the present Catechism of the Catholic Church says, prayer is the lifting up of our minds and hearts to God, to adore him, to thank him for his benefits, to ask him forgiveness, and to beg him for all the graces we need. In listening to all these four definitions, we see four ends: adoration, thanksgiving, atonement, and petition.